She came to sell the land, not to fall for the fight it demanded. Claire stepped off the small charter plane into the crisp Napa morning, the air carrying a subtle mix of wet soil and crushed grape leaves. The valley stretched before her, sun-drenched and endless, with rolling hills dotted by neatly arranged vines, their leaves flickering gold and green in the gentle breeze. She had left this world behind years ago, summers of barefoot runs between rows of Pinot Noir, laughter echoing through the estate, and evenings spent learning the rhythms of the vineyard under her father's patient guidance. Now those memories arrived uninvited, heavy with grief, each step up the gravel drive pressing the weight of her father's absence onto her chest. The Blackwood estate was still majestic, the house perched on a rise, its whitewashed walls reflecting the morning sun, the long wooden shutters closed as if in mourning. The funeral had passed, the casket lowered, the eulogies given, yet silence remained, stubborn and unyielding, leaving Claire alone with numbers, debts, and a vineyard whose life would not pause for grief or calculation. Her father had managed the estate for decades, but the ledgers left behind told a stark story. Mortgages, secret loans, lines of credit she hadn't known about, all threatening to consume the estate unless she acted. She had arrived intending to make the decision simple, to sell the land and return to Chicago, to the sterile security of her office. Yet reality refused simplicity. Stepping past the wrought iron gate slightly ajar, she felt a familiar tension. This land was not merely soil. It was inheritance, history, and responsibility entwined. From the barn, a faint smell of fermenting grapes reached her nose, sweet, sharp, almost cloying, carrying a reminder that the vineyard's work never paused. Inside, the cellar was dimly lit, the rows of barrels stacked meticulously, some marked with years and varietals, others with scribbled notes in her father's hand. A figure moved among them, hands careful, deliberate, measuring the curvature of staves, checking the temperature of each barrel. Claire recognized him from the local papers. Liam, the brilliant enologist whose career had been destroyed by a scandal in France he hadn't caused. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, eyes intense, scanning the barrels with the precision of someone who had lived and breathed wine for decades. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, wariness mirrored in both. She extended her hand in a tentative greeting, but he didn't respond, returning instead to his work with an almost imperceptible sigh, the faint click of his tools punctuating the silence. Claire felt a flicker of irritation, quickly replaced by awareness. Necessity would force them together. They had the same objective, but neither trusted the other. His disdain for corporate opportunists was apparent in the stiff line of his shoulders. Her skepticism of someone with a scandal-tainted reputation was equally sharp. "You're here to sell," Liam said finally, voice low, edged with caution. "I'm here to make sure it's worth saving," Claire replied, each word chosen deliberately. Their first conversation was functional, almost clinical, irrigation schedules, fermentation temperatures, and harvest timelines. Yet beneath the technical language, both sensed the unspoken challenge. Who would yield first? Claire moved deeper into the barn, noting the barrel's surfaces, slight bulges where fermentation had pushed wine upward, faint stains from overflow, the dull sheen of oak absorbing liquid in time. Each imperfection told a story. Each barrel represented months of labor and care. Liam's hands adjusted a pressure gauge, then paused to inspect the corking of a barrel. "This batch of Pinot Noir is unstable," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. Claire knelt to inspect a barrel, her eyes scanning the markings, calculating yield and potential losses. "And yet," she said, "it could still sell if handled correctly." Liam's gaze lingered on her, skeptical, as if weighing whether she understood more than numbers. She felt a pang of defensiveness. Her life had been corporate law, but she understood contracts, value, and stakes. That knowledge mattered here too. They walked the rows together, neither speaking for several minutes, listening to the subtle creaks of the wooden floors, the faint hum of fermenting juice, the rustle of leaves outside. Claire realized that to save the vineyard, she could not rely solely on numbers. She needed intuition, knowledge, patience, things her city life had not taught her. Liam, for his part, recognized the spark of competence beneath her corporate veneer. She would learn quickly, and perhaps, if necessity required it, she could become a worthy partner. Their discussion resumed with barrel samples, reading gravity levels, debating yeast strains, and adjusting airlocks. Each small agreement was a battle of egos and experience, but also a step toward mutual recognition. By late afternoon, Claire stepped outside, letting the cool breeze wash over her, the scent of earth, grape skins, and faint oak clinging to her clothes. She understood fully now. Selling the vineyard was no longer a simple transaction. This place demanded more than legal strategy. It demanded engagement, respect, and a partnership she had not anticipated. The first day ended without resolution, but with understanding. They would need each other. The vineyard, alive in its subtle demands and scents, had made that clear. The final harvest waited, and with it, a test of skill, patience, and the beginning of something neither Claire nor Liam expected. A fragile, cautious alliance, tempered by necessity, suspicion, and the faintest glimmer of respect. The next morning, Claire returned to the vineyard before sunrise, the sky a pale wash of pink and gold over the hills. The dew coated the vines, leaving droplets clinging to the leaves and the clusters of grapes, heavy with moisture and anticipation. Every step she took along the gravel paths pressed faintly into the earth, her boots sinking slightly, reminding her that this land was alive, responsive, and waiting. Liam was already in the main barn, measuring barrels with precise, methodical movements. His focus was absolute, but the set of his jaw and the tightness around his eyes betrayed wariness. Claire approached cautiously, knowing that the day would require more than politeness. "We need a plan for the last harvest," she said, voice steady. He glanced at her, an eyebrow raised. "You mean a plan we both survive?" His tone was dry, almost teasing, yet under it lay a sharp edge of skepticism. Claire suppressed a laugh. "I mean a plan that works. One that doesn't ruin the wine or the estate." He nodded once, curtly, then returned to his measurements. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. Words alone could not create trust. Only action would. The first task was assessing the health of the vines. Liam led Claire through the rows, stopping frequently to inspect leaves, check the tension of canes, and measure moisture levels in the soil. He explained the subtle cues, the gloss of a leaf, the slight discoloration at the edge of a cluster, that indicated whether grapes would thrive or turn sour. Claire listened intently, asking precise questions, her legal mind translating his observations into measurable consequences: yield, timing, potential profit. "This frost could reduce the Cabernet by 20% if we don't adjust irrigation," Liam said, gesturing toward a section of vines where frost had touched the lower leaves. Claire frowned. "We'll need to reroute the water lines," she said, considering cost, labor, and time. Liam's eyes narrowed. "You actually know what you're talking about." She smirked faintly. "Numbers never lie. You'll learn to trust them." He snorted, but she saw the corners of his mouth twitch in amusement. Their tentative teamwork began with small tasks: inspecting barrels, adjusting fermentation temperatures, pruning affected leaves. Each act required compromise. Claire had ideas, often grounded in efficiency, while Liam relied on instinct and experience. Sometimes they clashed. She wanted to automate irrigation. He wanted to feel the moisture in the soil, to sense the land's rhythm. But necessity forced collaboration. Hours passed with the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows that shifted with the day. As they worked, Claire noticed the precision in Liam's movements, the care with which he handled each vine, each grape. It was meticulous, obsessive even, but it carried a truth she respected. This man, ostracized in the corporate and viniculture world, held an integrity that could not be manufactured. They paused for a short lunch near a small creek running through the property. Claire unpacked a thermos of tea and a sandwich, setting it down on a flat rock. Liam declined, eyes scanning the vineyard as if danger could appear at any row. "You're tense," Claire observed. "You think I'll mess something up?" "No," he said slowly. "I think your kind usually does, but you listen." The faint acknowledgement made her chest tighten. Trust would be measured in actions, not words, and today, he had started listening. Shadows lengthened as evening approached. They stood together, surveying the rows of vines glistening with dew. "Not perfect," Liam said quietly, "but better than yesterday. Better than nothing." Claire replied, eyes scanning the horizon. We can save this. A faint smile flickered on Liam's face. You think so? She met his gaze. I know so. The first cracks of mutual respect had formed, though unspoken. They were not friends, not allies in sentiment, only in necessity, but that sufficed for now. As darkness fell, the barn lights glowed warmly, illuminating barrels and tools, shadows dancing across wooden walls. Claire realized that the vineyard demanded more than law or numbers. It demanded endurance, attention, and partnership. Liam's skill paired with her diligence could yield results neither could achieve alone. Yet beneath the cooperation lay tension, a silent awareness that their worlds, values, and reputations were fundamentally different. That tension, however, carried potential. As she walked back to the main house that evening, the smell of earth, oak, and fermenting grapes lingered. She felt for the first time in weeks a sense of purpose beyond grief or ambition. Saving this vineyard would be difficult, but it was tangible, real, and hers to attempt. And Liam, skeptical, stubborn, exiled, was the only one who could make it possible. Their alliance was born not from friendship, desire, or trust, but from necessity. Yet Claire sensed that necessity could become something more. Tomorrow, they would begin the long work of saving the final harvest. Tonight, she allowed herself the faintest optimism that perhaps, in saving the vineyard, they might also save a part of themselves. The valley was bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon when Claire first saw him again. Marcus stood at the edge of the driveway, his tailored jacket crisp even against the warmth of the sun, the confident stance of a man accustomed to control and expectation. His eyes, dark and calculating, lingered on her for a moment that stretched too long, tracing every line of her face as if measuring how much power she still held. The breeze carried the scent of ripe grapes and damp earth, but even that familiar aroma could not mask the tension that tightened Claire's chest. Marcus smiled faintly, that practiced curve of lips that had once charmed her in ways she refused to remember. Claire, he said smoothly, voice carrying both nostalgia and authority. I hear your father's vineyard could use some guidance. Her heart tightened. Guidance. Translation, control. She forced a neutral expression, hands on her hips. Marcus, it's a surprise to see you here. I imagine, he replied lightly. You weren't expecting to have any old flames looming over the harvest. His gaze flicked past her, surveying the vineyard as though it belonged to him. Claire's mind raced. He was not here for a casual visit. His timing, his posture, his presence, every detail screamed strategy. I'm not selling, she said carefully. Not yet. And certainly not to you. Marcus's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. But I am here to make an offer, he said smoothly. A fair one. An opportunity to sell the estate at a reasonable price before the last harvest becomes complicated. Claire's stomach tightened. She knew the value of his fair offers. Years in corporate law had taught her the thin line between opportunity and entrapment. And beneath it, something personal simmered. He wanted revenge for the abandonment years ago, the broken engagement she had left behind for career, for ambition, for something he could never control. The vineyard has debts, Marcus continued, his tone almost sympathetic. I could take the burden off your shoulders. Save you the trouble. She studied him, noting the precise way he measured her reactions. Every gesture, every pause, had intent. Or you could just claim it cheaply and run it into the ground, she said evenly. Exactly, Marcus replied, his smile sharpening. You see, Claire, I'm generous. I offer relief, but the vineyard must be in capable hands. Claire's eyes narrowed. You don't offer generosity. You offer leverage. Marcus tilted his head, as if amused. Leverage is merely perspective. What you see as manipulation, I see as efficiency. And I am efficient, Claire. Always. Her mind flashed to the ledgers, the debts hidden in secret accounts, the unpaid contractors, the unpaid harvest workers. Had he been involved all along? Had he orchestrated her father's desperation? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she focused on the vineyard, the rows of vines stretching into gold and green, the barrels stacked meticulously, and the faint smell of fermenting grape juice drifting from the barn. The land demanded clarity, precision, and action. Marcus had power here, but only if she allowed it. I'm not selling, she said again, firmer this time. And if you try to interfere with the harvest, I will make sure every step of your plan is exposed. Marcus's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow crossing his composed demeanor, but his mask returned instantly. Very well, he said. I enjoy a challenge. Without another word, he turned, walking down the gravel drive with a measured pace that betrayed both satisfaction and impatience. Claire watched him go, the breeze stirring the vines as though the land itself recoiled at his presence. She turned toward the barn, finding Liam still bent over a barrel, adjusting a thermometer. His brow lifted, sensing the change in the air. Who was that? He asked quietly. Claire hesitated. Marcus, my father's former acquaintance, old flame, and a very dangerous adversary. Liam's jaw tightened. Did he cause these debts? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I suspect he's had his hands in them longer than anyone realized. Liam nodded, eyes scanning the vineyard as if calculating the implications. Then we need to focus on the harvest. If he wants leverage, the only way to deny it is to make this vineyard untouchable. Claire agreed. Together, they moved through the rows of vines, hands busy with pruning, checking soil moisture, and adjusting irrigation lines. The presence of Marcus lingered like a shadow over the sunlit fields, unspoken but heavy. As they worked, Claire realized the stakes were no longer merely financial. Every barrel, every cluster of grapes, and every careful adjustment to fermentation became a statement of defiance. Liam noticed her tension, the way she calculated each move, and understood that her corporate instincts could be both asset and liability. Morning arrived with the scent of wet earth and sun-warmed grapes. Claire walked through the vineyard before anyone else, her boots sinking slightly into the soft soil, dew soaking the hems of her pants. Every vine she touched, every cluster she inspected, reminded her that this was living inheritance, delicate and demanding. Liam was already at the far end of the vineyard, measuring soil moisture and taking notes in a small, weathered notebook. His brow furrowed as he crouched over a patch of Cabernet Sauvignon struggling to recover from the frost. This section is compromised, he said without looking up. If we don't adjust the drip lines immediately, the sugar content will never stabilize. Claire knelt beside him, tracing the veins of the leaves, feeling their brittle texture. We'll redirect the water tonight, she replied, translating his observations into actionable steps. She felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with purpose. This land demanded attention, decisiveness, and courage. Together, they began work. Hours passed in a rhythm of measured labor. Claire learned to feel the soil, to sense which vines were stressed, which clusters required immediate attention. Liam watched her adapt quickly, noting her analytical mind applied not to contracts or spreadsheets, but to living plants, each vine responding to her touch and assessment. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of irritation, challenge, and unspoken admiration. She attempted one method to stimulate fermentation in a stubborn batch, and he immediately intervened. You're rushing it, he said, voice firm but not unkind. Patience is part of the process. Claire met his eyes. And precision is mine, she countered. They clashed not out of malice, but out of differing principles. Discipline versus instinct, experience versus strategy. Yet every disagreement ended with compromise, every adjustment a tiny step toward mutual respect. By midday, the sun had climbed high, turning the vineyard into a mosaic of gold, green, and shadow. Claire wiped sweat from her brow and inhaled the sharp, sweet aroma of fermenting juice. She noticed the subtle way Liam's hands moved, the care he took in adjusting each barrel, the almost imperceptible hum he made when checking fermentation temperatures. His focus was absolute, yet there was a quiet joy in his movements, a reverence for the work she had never experienced in boardrooms. Lunch came in the form of sandwiches shared silently on a flat stone near the creek. Liam ate mechanically, scanning the vineyard for irregularities. Claire, by contrast, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, looking over the rolling hills, the glimmering barrels, the sun-warmed leaves. I used to think my life in Chicago was everything, she admitted softly, but here it feels alive in ways I didn't know I needed. Liam's eyes flicked to her, but he said nothing, simply nodded. Words were unnecessary, their actions spoke louder. The afternoon demanded their full attention. They rerouted water lines, manually pruned frost-damaged leaves, and adjusted barrels to prevent overheating. The work was exhausting, their muscles aching in ways Claire had never experienced in her polished office life. Yet the physicality brought them closer. Side by side, hands brushing occasionally as they lifted hoses or adjusted barrels, the tension shifted from hostility to collaboration. Claire began to notice the precision in Liam's technique, the gentle twist of a vine, the careful tilting of a barrel, the deliberate assessment of grape clusters. His skill was unmatched, and for the first time, she felt not just respect, but awe. Evening approached, and the sky painted itself in shades of lavender and amber. They paused, surveying the rows of vines glistening with dew and sunlight, exhausted but triumphant. "Better than yesterday," Liam said, voice low, almost reluctant praise. Claire met his gaze. "We're making progress," she replied. In that moment, the barriers between them softened, though neither would admit it aloud. They were not friends, not lovers, yet, but a fragile, professional intimacy had begun to form. The vineyard had become their shared language, each vine and barrel a conduit for understanding. Even as they worked, Claire could feel Marcus's shadow looming. The thought of his manipulations, his offers, and his potential interference lingered in the back of her mind, adding a tension beneath the rhythm of labor. But for now, they focused on what they could control: the land, the harvest, and the delicate alchemy of transforming grapes into wine. That night, Claire lay in the guest room of the estate, the sounds of the vineyard, creaking barrels, distant rustle of leaves, and the faint murmur of fermentation, lulling her into reflection. Liam had proven skill, discipline, and integrity. She had proven adaptability, leadership, and resilience. They had survived the first trial together. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but for the first time since returning, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the vineyard could be saved. Perhaps, in saving it, she could find something she had long forgotten: purpose, connection, and the thrill of working with someone whose skill matched her determination. And perhaps, just perhaps, the spark between them was not entirely professional. The night air was thick with the scent of crushed grapes, damp earth, and faint oak from the barrels lining the barn. Claire's arms ached, her hands blistered, yet a fierce exhilaration coursed through her veins. The last irrigation lines had been rerouted, frost-damaged leaves pruned, and the most vulnerable clusters saved from the relentless sun. Liam stood across from her, chest heaving, sweat glistening on his forehead, hair sticking in damp strands to his face. Neither spoke immediately. Words were unnecessary. The vineyard had demanded their all, and in meeting that demand, they had learned more about each other than hours of conversation could ever reveal. Claire wiped her brow and extended a hand toward a barrel, gesturing toward the stabilized Pinot Noir. "We did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Liam's gaze shifted from the barrel to her face. His dark eyes, intense and unwavering, searched hers for something she couldn't name. "We did," he said, voice low, barely above a murmur. There was a pause, the silence almost sacred, broken only by the soft creak of wood and distant rustling of vines in the night breeze. Slowly, he stepped closer, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. Claire felt her pulse spike, every nerve alive to his presence. They had been wary, cautious, often testing boundaries during the labor, but exhaustion had stripped away the pretenses. In the quiet of the barn, surrounded by the work of their hands, the intensity between them was undeniable. Liam reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, deliberate, respectful, yet it carried a weight that made Claire catch her breath. You're remarkable," he said quietly, voice rough with emotion. "You adapt, you endure, you care." Claire swallowed, heart racing. "I only did what needed to be done," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You taught me how." Their eyes met, holding the tension of months compressed into this single, charged moment. Claire felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a mix of relief, admiration, and something deeper she had not anticipated. Liam's hand lingered near hers, the faintest brush against her knuckles sending a jolt through her. She realized that their shared struggle had built trust, respect, and something dangerously close to desire. The night seemed to contract around them, enclosing them in the scent of wine, earth, and sweat. each inhalation heavy with intimacy. Liam stepped closer, closer still, until their breaths mingled, the space between them electric. "Claire," he murmured, voice husky. "I didn't think," he trailed off, uncertainty flashing in his eyes for the briefest instant before resolve returned. Without warning, she closed the distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was at once tentative and urgent. Months of tension, mutual challenge, and exhaustion poured into that single gesture. Liam responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist, holding her firmly yet gently, as if he feared she might vanish if he let go. Time seemed suspended. Outside, the vineyard was quiet, the night deepening around the barn, the stars peeking through the wooden beams overhead. They broke apart briefly, foreheads resting together, breaths mingling, hearts pounding in synchrony. Claire's mind raced. This was not a fantasy, not a carefree romance. It was real, earned, born from shared struggle, mutual reliance, and the vulnerability of exhaustion. Liam's gaze softened, vulnerability now showing alongside his usual intensity. "We're different worlds," he said. "You? Chicago, law, contracts. Me, vineyards, fermentation, scandal." Claire smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth tinged with both sadness and hope. "And yet here we are," she said. "Together. For now." The kiss resumed, slower this time, exploratory, a dance of trust and desire, each learning the other's boundaries, each surrendering to the intimacy forged in toil and adversity. Hours passed in quiet togetherness, the barn a sanctuary from the pressures of debts, threats, and the looming presence of Marcus. They spoke little, sharing only glances, touches, and the occasional whispered word, their connection solidifying in the shadow of the vineyard they had fought to save. By dawn, Claire sat on a bale of straw, exhausted yet elated, as Liam adjusted barrels nearby. The first hints of sunlight filtered through the barn's wooden slats, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the warm glow. She realized something profound. The vineyard had not only tested their skill, patience, and resilience. It had created a bond impossible to ignore, a connection forged in sweat, determination, and mutual respect. "We have a long road ahead," Claire murmured, voice barely audible. Liam nodded, eyes soft but resolute. "And whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." The vineyard outside awaited their continued labor, threats still looming, harvest not fully secured. But in that moment, amidst the scent of grapes, oak, and earth, Claire and Liam had crossed the boundary from partners to something far more intimate. Exhaustion, relief, and desire intertwined, leaving them raw, connected, and aware that their worlds would never be entirely separate again. The fragile peace of the previous night evaporated with the dawn. The intimacy they had shared in the barn, the shared breath, the silent promises, felt like a fever dream once the sun hit the dusty valley floor. By 9 a.m., the temperature had already spiked, and the ground felt unervingly dry underfoot. Liam was back to his clinical, distant self, his focus entirely on the wilting vines, as if he were trying to prune away the memory of his lips on hers. They worked in a strained, silent rhythm until the heat of midday pressed down on the vineyard, turning the air thick and heavy. Claire moved swiftly between the rows, clipboard in hand, noting moisture levels and the progress of fermentation. Then the first ripple of tension arrived, not from them, but from a notice at the edge of the property. A large truck had arrived at the far end of the estate, its presence incongruous and imposing among the gentle hills. Claire's brow furrowed. "I didn't schedule deliveries today," she murmured. Liam's gaze sharpened. "Neither did I." They moved closer, and a uniformed man handed Claire a letter, official-looking and sealed with the insignia of the local water authority. She tore it open, scanning quickly. Her pulse quickened. Marcus had used his influence to reroute water access across the valley. Legal language masked the truth. The vineyard's irrigation had been restricted during the peak of a record-breaking heatwave. Without immediate intervention, the last harvest, the fruit of months of careful planning and labor, would wither under the sun. Liam's eyes darkened. "He's targeting the harvest directly," he said, voice low and tense. "This isn't negotiation. It's sabotage." Claire clenched her jaw, anger and fear mingling. "Then we fight it," she said. We can't let him destroy the vineyard. Not now. This wasn't the rhythmic labor of the previous days. This was a siege. As the mercury climbed, the vines began to weep, their leaves turning a sickly, translucent yellow. Claire didn't wait for Liam's instructions this time. She grabbed the heavy coupling of the emergency pump, her hands slick with grease and grit. Every gallon of water they diverted from the creek felt like a drop of blood back into the estate. They didn't talk about patience or process anymore. They fought the heat with a silent, desperate violence that left their lungs burning. The sun climbed higher, relentless, baking the vines in gold light, as if mocking their struggle. By late afternoon, the manual irrigation system was barely maintaining stability. Some vines had already begun to droop, stress evident in their color and texture. Liam surveyed the rows, lips pressed in a thin line, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "We're buying time, but it's not enough," he admitted. Claire took a deep breath, staring across the vineyard, imagining the consequences if the harvest failed. Lost revenue, tarnished reputation, and a final chance to save her father's legacy slipping through her fingers. "Then we keep going," she said firmly. "No shortcuts. Every row, every barrel. We finish this." As evening fell, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the valley. They worked until their hands were raw, clothing soaked with sweat and dirt, faces streaked with grime. Silence settled only briefly, broken by the creak of barrels and the distant call of birds returning to roost. At last, they paused, surveying the vineyard as the last light shimmered across leaves heavy with grape clusters. "We saved enough for now," Liam said quietly, exhaustion lining his voice. Claire nodded, chest heaving, hands trembling slightly. "It's a start," she whispered. But beneath their temporary victory, the awareness of Marcus's power lingered like a shadow. He had not only attacked the vineyard but also tested them, forced them to rely on one another under extreme pressure. And in that reliance, an unspoken bond had formed. They were no longer strangers united by necessity. They had become a team forged in sweat, sun, and determination. That night, Claire lay awake in the guest room, the musky scent of grape skins and earth clinging to her clothes, replaying every decision of the day. Liam had proven his skill, patience, and reliability, and she had proven that she could adapt, lead, and endure. The vineyard had demanded their best, and in meeting that demand, they had glimpsed the potential of a shared purpose. Outside, the gentle rustle of leaves in the cool night air seemed almost approving, whispering that the final harvest still had a chance. And deep within her, Claire realized that saving the vineyard would require more than labor and strategy. It would require courage, trust, and the resilience to withstand whatever Marcus would attempt next. The brief serenity of the morning was shattered just a few hours later when a courier arrived at the main gate, his presence a stark reminder that their sanctuary was under siege. Claire moved deliberately between the rows, checking barrels and inspecting the clusters of grapes that would become the culmination of months of work. Yet despite the serenity of the land, a subtle tension gnawed at her, an instinctual warning she couldn't ignore. A courier arrived mid-morning, carrying 2 envelopes, official-looking and heavy with paper that smelled faintly of wax and ink. Claire's name was on one, Liam's on the other. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened hers. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, and photos that appeared to show Liam meeting with a representative of Vitus Corp, the company Marcus controlled. Claire's eyes tracked the timestamps on the photos. Her legal brain, trained to spot inconsistencies in million-dollar contracts, paused. The photo showed Liam at a cafe in town at 2 p.m. last Tuesday, but last Tuesday, they had been neck-deep in the creek fixing the pump until sundown. The lighting in the photo was wrong. The shadows were too long for mid-afternoon. It wasn't proof of betrayal. It was a poorly executed fabrication. The panic in her chest died, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Marcus wasn't just trying to buy the land. He was trying to gaslight her. She looked at Liam, who was holding an envelope of his own, his face dark with confusion. "Liam, wait," she said, her voice regaining its professional edge. "Look at the dates. These aren't real." Liam's response was quiet, controlled, but edged with pain. "I did nothing but save this vineyard. Nothing else. You have to trust me, Claire. Marcus is behind this." Her eyes narrowed. Uncertainty and anger warring in her gaze. "I know they're fake," she whispered, her eyes hardening as she looked at the photos again. "But if he's willing to go this far, he's already poisoned every other well we have. It's not just about trust, Liam. It's about how much more of this is out there." Liam's frustration broke momentarily, revealing the raw depth of emotion he usually concealed. "Because the work we've done, the nights in the vineyard, the harvest saved under the sun, under frost, under drought, that is real. You know it. You feel it. Don't let a man who wants to destroy your family's legacy turn us against each other." The air between them vibrated with tension, a mixture of exhaustion, anger, and lingering desire. Their emotions collided as fiercely as the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on the vineyard. Neither could fully take a step forward or back. The trust they had built was fragile, teetering on the edge of destruction. Claire dropped the envelopes onto a nearby barrel, hands shaking. I need proof," she admitted, voice cracking. I can't just take your word." Liam nodded slowly, understanding the necessity, though hurt laced his expression. "Then we find it," he said. "Together. But we do it with our heads, not our fears." For the first time since Marcus's interference, they were no longer just reacting. They were strategizing. Claire inhaled sharply, the scent of crushed grapes and fermenting juice grounding her. She realized that the vineyard was not only their shared labor, but also their battleground, and their trust, however fractured, was the only weapon strong enough to survive the next moves Marcus would make. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the vineyard, Claire and Liam returned to the rows of vines. Each movement was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement that despite the doubts, they were united by necessity and, perhaps, something deeper. The envelopes remained on the barrel, a looming reminder of the external threat, but for now, their focus was on survival, on the harvest, and on salvaging the fragile trust that would be critical in the battles to come. Outside, the vineyard seemed to breathe, the scent of earth and grapes mingling with tension and determination. Claire knew that Marcus had struck a deep blow, but she also knew that the vineyard, and the bond forming with Liam, would not be easily broken. The night ahead would be long, and the work to reclaim truth would be arduous. Yet for the first time since his arrival, Marcus's shadow was not entirely overpowering. It had awakened resilience, strategy, and an undeniable connection between two people bound by sweat, soil, and shared struggle. The discovery of the forged photos didn't bring peace. It brought a cold, calculated fury. Claire didn't waste time on further doubt. If Marcus was sloppy enough to fake timestamps, he was desperate enough to have left a paper trail elsewhere. She spent the next few hours not in the fields, but locked in her father's study, stripping away the emotional weight of the past to look at the estate's history through the lens of a corporate investigator. The tension with Liam remained, but it had shifted from suspicion to a shared, grim focus on the counterstrike. The morning light broke over the valley, sharp and clear, exposing every contour of the vineyard. Claire stood at the edge of the rows, clipboard in hand, but her focus had shifted. The fear, the suspicion, and the exhaustion of the past days had not dissipated. They had crystallized into resolve. Marcus had struck, and he had assumed she would crumble. But now, Claire understood, she could fight on his terms. First, she gathered the old notebooks, financial ledgers, and letters from her father's office. Dusty pages held the story of a man cornered by hidden debts, blackmailed by Marcus's reach for years. Every entry, every annotation, revealed meticulous calculations, desperate strategies, and subtle warnings that had been ignored in her pursuit of corporate efficiency in Chicago. She sorted them carefully, creating a timeline, cross-referencing debts, payments, and interactions with Marcus. The pieces aligned like a puzzle, exposing the network of coercion that had manipulated her family and now threatened the vineyard. Liam approached, hesitant but observant. His eyes met hers, a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "You're digging," he said quietly, gesturing to the piles of papers. Claire didn't look up. "We have to," she replied. "He's not just attacking the vineyard. He's attacking everything my father built, and us." Liam nodded, silent acknowledgement. The tension between them had not fully healed, but necessity demanded cooperation. Claire led him through her findings, pointing out entries that linked Marcus to water diversions, forged communications, and subtle intimidation tactics against workers and creditors. Liam's eyes narrowed as he traced the timeline: the scandal in France, the vineyard sabotage, and now Marcus's broader scheme, all converging. "It's extensive," he said, voice tight with suppressed anger. "He's calculated, meticulous, ruthless." Claire allowed herself a brief smile. "Exactly. And that's why we can fight him with facts, not emotion." The hours that followed were intense. They worked in tandem, combining her analytical skill and legal expertise with his intimate knowledge of the vineyard and the logistics of operations. Claire prepared formal statements, compiled evidence, and documented inconsistencies in Marcus's manipulations. Liam cross-referenced irrigation schedules, employee testimonies, and the timestamps of delivery diversions to corroborate her findings. As the sun climbed high, their collaboration rekindled a spark of trust that had been fractured. Claire noticed the subtle changes in Liam, the careful attention to detail, the slight softening of his stance, the rare smile when she discovered a crucial link. And Liam noticed her determination, her ability to cut through confusion and fear, her unwavering focus on justice rather than retribution. By late afternoon, they had assembled a compelling case: photographs, emails, financial records, and corroborating witness statements painting an undeniable picture of Marcus's sabotage and coercion. Claire's pulse quickened as she reviewed the final stack of documents. "This," she said softly, "is our proof. This is how we reclaim what's ours and expose him for what he really is." Liam leaned against a barrel, eyes sweeping over the collected evidence, a mixture of admiration and renewed trust evident. "You've done all this, and I doubted you," he said quietly, voice edged with humility and regret. Claire met his gaze, a complex smile forming. "Doubt is easy when someone sows fear," she replied. "The hard part is seeing through it." Together, they formulated a plan for confrontation. It would not be a matter of emotion or accusation. It would be a meticulous, factual dismantling of Marcus's network, using every piece of evidence they had painstakingly collected. The lingering shadow of their earlier distrust remained, but it was now tempered by a renewed alliance, respect, and a cautious intimacy born from shared struggle. That night, Claire reviewed the documents one last time, the scent of fermenting grapes filling the room, grounding her in reality. Liam sat nearby, silent but attentive, his presence no longer a source of suspicion but a support. Together, they had turned the tide, taking the first steps toward exposing Marcus, reclaiming the vineyard, and rebuilding the fragile trust between them. The night stretched long and silent, but Claire felt a surge of clarity and determination. Marcus had underestimated her. He had underestimated them both. Tomorrow, they would confront him with facts, evidence, and unwavering resolve. And in that confrontation, the first real victory against deceit, sabotage, and fractured trust would be theirs. The vineyard hummed around them, quiet, fertile, and patient, ready to reward those who fought with skill, courage, and unity. Claire and Liam were no longer just caretakers. They were defenders, strategists, and, in the slow burn of renewed connection, something far more significant. The day of the final tasting dawned crisp and clear, sunlight spilling over the rolling hills of the Napa Valley, illuminating the vineyard in golden light. Claire stood at the edge of the estate, the carefully curated rows of vines stretching before her, their leaves still damp with morning dew. Every barrel, every grape cluster, every subtle note of the fermenting wine carried the months of labor, sweat, and struggle. Today was the culmination of everything: effort, trust, strategy, and resilience. The guests arrived, renowned critics, sommeliers, and investors from around the world, their polished appearances and sharp eyes reflecting the high stakes of the tasting. Marcus arrived last, his presence commanding, his smile predatory, as if he already anticipated triumph. Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she steadied herself. In her hands were the documents, photographs, and records that exposed Marcus's interference with the vineyard, water diversions, financial manipulation, and coercion. Liam, by her side, adjusted barrels and set up the tasting station, calm and precise, his dark eyes flicking toward Marcus briefly before returning to the wine. Claire stepped forward to address the assembled guests. Her voice was steady, resonant, commanding attention. Before the tasting begins, she said, I want to provide context for this vintage. Every note, every aroma, and every flavor you experience today is the result of resilience, precision, and integrity. She gestured subtly to Liam. This harvest, despite sabotage and interference, represents the culmination of months of careful cultivation and dedication. And unfortunately, not all parties involved in the history of this estate have acted in the same spirit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire continued, presenting her evidence with meticulous clarity. Records of diverted water during peak drought, forged communications implicating Marcus in financial coercion, and testimonies from workers and consultants that verified every claim. Liam assisted, confirming technical details of irrigation and fermentation schedules, providing context to ensure credibility. Marcus stepped forward, a sneer twisting his features. This is theater, Claire. Paperwork proves nothing in this valley. Claire didn't flinch. She leaned in, her voice a cold blade of professional precision. The paperwork isn't for the critics, Marcus. It's for the SEC. I've already flagged the shell companies you used to buy up the surrounding water rights. By tomorrow morning, your efficient acquisition strategy will be a federal racketeering investigation. You aren't here to buy a vineyard anymore. You're here to decide if you want to leave in handcuffs or in silence. The blood drained from Marcus's face. For the first time, he didn't have a rebuttal. He looked at the gathered investors, men and women who lived by reputation, and saw them stepping away from him as if he were radioactive. This is not opinion, she stated. This is fact. Any attempt to undermine the integrity of this estate or its people will be exposed. With that, the tasting began. Claire poured the first glasses, guiding the critics through the process. Liam stood close, explaining subtle notes, the unique character of the soil, and the painstaking methods employed to save the harvest. The critics swirled, sniffed, and sipped, murmurs of appreciation rippling through the crowd. The complexity, depth, and balance of the wines were unmistakable, each sip a testament to months of labor, perseverance, and undeterred vision. Marcus watched, visibly frustrated, as his attempts at dominance crumbled in real time. Claire maintained her composure, observing the subtle expressions of the critics, noting the rising nods of approval. Finally, the head sommelier set down his glass. This vintage, he pronounced, is extraordinary. It displays not only technical mastery, but a narrative of resilience and care rarely found in wines of this caliber. Applause rippled through the room. Marcus's expression was a mask of disbelief and fury. Claire stepped forward, offering a measured, dignified smile. Integrity and dedication always prevail, she said softly, though firmly. Liam's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared triumph. The critics continued their evaluations, but the verdict was clear. The estate was saved, the wine exceptional, and Marcus's attempts at sabotage laid bare. After the crowd departed, the estate quiet once more. Claire and Liam stood together amidst the barrels and vines. Claire looked at Liam, her decision clear. The allure of her corporate life in Chicago no longer held sway. Here, amidst the vineyard she had fought to protect, was purpose, connection, and authenticity. I'm staying, she said quietly, voice firm with certainty. Liam smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and something softer, deeper. Good, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We've earned this. They walked together through the rows of vines, shoulders brushing, a gentle intimacy threading through each step. The vineyard, resilient and thriving, mirrored their journey, challenged, tested, and ultimately transformed by determination, trust, and courage. Marcus was defeated, the vineyard triumphant, and for the first time in months, she felt fully present, fully alive, and fully committed to the land, the harvest, and to Liam. Their journey was not a fairy tale. It was real, intricate, and earned. And in that reality, they had found a beginning, not an end.